this video, you will learn what it means to remove, replace, and regenerate. You will learn what an invasive species is, why we should sustain native species, and what pollinators are and why we need them. Remove, replace, and regenerate. Individually, these words may not seem like they have much to do with one another, but when you put them together, they create a plan that can be used to revitalize or increase the health of our natural environments. Remove refers to getting rid of invasive species. What is an invasive species? Invasive species are plants or animals that do not naturally grow in a particular area. They are brought in by humans intentionally or unintentionally. Once they are in the new location, there are qualities that allow them to prosper and reproduce rapidly. These qualities may be their ability to survive harsher weather conditions or the lack of a natural predator. By this we mean there is no native species that suppress the invasive. Since it has not been there in the past, the native animals are not adapted to preying on the invasive species. Therefore, it is not eliminated by the natural ecosystem. This causes problems because they can outcompete necessary native species, cause them to suffer, and prevent them from growing. An example of this is Japanese bush honeysuckle. In Indiana, Japanese bush honeysuckle will grow in forest understories, as you can see here. Because it is invasive, it can grow longer into the winter and starts growing sooner in the spring. It will take up nutrients and water native trees need to grow, and it blocks sunlight from reaching the new trees, which are called seedlings, and they grow in the lowest part of the understories where the sunlight cannot get past the invasive species. These seedlings then cannot get the sun they need to photosynthesize since the branches and leaves, or canopy, of the invasive species acts as a barrier. It is extremely important that we remove these species from our ecosystems and prevent them from crowding out our forests. But it must be done carefully. Oftentimes, when you try to get rid of or exterminate these species, it can make matters worse. Autumn olive is a prime example of this problem. When landowners attempt to pull autumn olive up from the ground, they often leave behind little pieces of the roots, called runners. These runners will each become a new plant. The next part of our plan is to replace the invasive species with native species. This is extremely important because native species have been evolving for years to become accustomed to growing in their natural habitat. They are more likely to provide food and shelter for native wildlife, and they are better able to synchronize growth with the surrounding ecosystem. Wildlife instinctually know which nuts and berries are safe to eat, which season they should eat them, and which types of vegetation provide the best shelter. By following Step 1, which is to remove invasive species, and Step 2, which is to replace them with native species, Step 3 will come naturally. The natural ecosystem will regenerate and provide habitat for the Earth's hardest working wildlife, the pollinators. A pollinator is an organism that assists in the natural cycle of plant regeneration and growth by spreading pollen from one plant to another. It is estimated that 75% of all flowering species, including fruits and vegetables, need pollinators to grow. Pollinators may be birds, bats, flies, wasps, butterflies and moths, lizards, dragonflies, beetles, and other insects. Each of these pollinators may prefer a different plant because it will provide a different combination of amino acids and sugar, known as nectar. Biodiversity, which is an area's variation in species, allows for pollinators to get different nectars. Having biodiversity also means that there will be blooms throughout the year rather than only at one time. This provides food for pollinators throughout different seasons. Pollinators need to be protected, and one way of doing this is by creating the proper habitat. Native plants provide shelter for pollinators. They need plants to be as close as possible so danger is minimized while they move to collect nectar. If we do not protect pollinator wildlife by preventing invasive species, protecting native species, and creating a safe environment, we could end up without enough pollinators to grow our food. In areas of southwest China, they have depleted so many of their bees due to improper management and pesticide chemical use. Pear and apple orchards must be hand-pollinated. Protecting pollinator habitat and even encouraging it through protective plans like remove, replace, and regenerate can prevent this from happening. Like all animals, pollinators need food, shelter, and water. We can help improve this by removing invasive species, replacing them with native species, and helping regenerate our natural ecosystems. If you would like to know more about removing invasive species and creating a pollinator habitat, check with your local Soil and Water Conservation District or the Natural Resources Conservation Service.